Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a bit of a quiet, smaller crowd here, maybe not as sexy as the other speakers. Thank you for coming this afternoon. It is the afternoon, last session. It's super exciting. Great session before where we really saw some amazing initiatives, and we all understand that these initiatives wouldn't be possible without technology. I'm not the most technical savvy person in the room, but I do understand that technology is very crucial, and in essence, it is a tool. It's a tool to achieve these sustainable goals that we talk about. So today's topic is really how do we use these tools or forms of technology within our businesses and practices to achieve these sustainable goals and outcomes. With me today, I have a fantastic panel that will hopefully navigate me through my lack of tech knowledge. So I'll ask you all to please introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about maybe your own role and your company's technological advancements or implementation of technology towards sustainability. Chris?
Okay. My name is Chris Moses. I work for Gap Inc. My role is to support in a lot of different ways efforts against our long-term sourcing strategy and our supply configuration, and also how we solve really the brand problem and the business problem and the customer problem with the right value chain and bring those two things together. In terms of sustainability, Gap Inc. We're a relatively large company that has a lot of footprint in the manufacturing space. We produce over 1 billion garments a year. We affect over 1.5 million workers. And so for us, social compliance and social sustainability has always been a critical factor. For many years, we have a deep legacy in that area. And then we've become more and more engaged the last 5 to 10 years with respect to pushing environmental sustainability. And so a lot of our efforts, we have internal goals and objectives that now have become more public. That drives a lot of activities. We try to figure out how to become a more sustainable partner to our communities and to the world.
Yep.
Thank you. So my name is Malin Lundahl, and I work as Sustainability Manager for the Greater China region in our sales organization for the H&M brand. So that's the part of the organization that have all our different stores in this region. For H&M, we've been on a sustainability journey for a long time. I would say we really started to work strategically with sustainability from the mid-90s, and then we've amplified that work until where we are today. We have a very bold vision of leading the change towards a circular and renewable fashion industry while being a fair and equal company. So we really want to push the fashion industry in the right direction when it comes to sustainability. We are a very big company, one of the biggest fashion companies in the world, and with that comes great responsibility, but also great opportunity to really look at new sustainable business models and see how we can use, for example, tech to reach our goals. I could talk forever about this, so I think I will leave it like that, and then we can go in more to detail in a bit.
No worries. Janice?
Hi, I'm Janice from HUGO Boss. And if you look at my title, you will see I come from the Sportswear division. And that's where in the German terminology, actually I'm not that sporty, but why I'm from the Sportswear division, because in HUGO Boss, everything not in suiting is sportswear. So actually, I'm responsible for like casual or leisure or smart casual collection. So that's very HUGO Boss way. And I guess many of you know that we are a German company. So as you know, German company is very process-driven. If we're talking about technology, I would say, I'd rather say we are very process-driven, looking at the new process on supply chain, on what we do. And that's why I like what I'm doing for the company, because I always feel I'm in quite not a conventional sourcing role in many companies. And 50% of my focus is like typical sourcing merchandising, but the other 50%, sustainability and vendor management is also under me in Asia. So it's quite already a very integrated role in Asia office. And this is what I like. And from here, I understand from the company is they start from the process, how they drive and make it a simple model and to roll out. Yeah, and then we can talk more later in the question. Yeah.
No problems. And Brenda?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. When you look at my company name, I think nobody knows Eurogroup. But actually, we are the direct buying office for Coop in Switzerland. So I think a few hands will raise, I know what Coop. So Coop is like the umbrella for Swiss people because we are for supplying food and non-food to the daily life of the citizens. So for garment is not a big part. So we are not a big player, H&M and even HUGO Boss. And I don't understand why we are always confined in Switzerland, a very boring Switzerland with the blue sky and clear water. So it seems DNA in the Swiss people is sustainability. Because when we look at our sourcing, in the majority, we have to source everything in the organic way, in the recycled way, in all the sustainable way along the supply chain. So we don't have really huge investment or a huge announcement in technology, but we would like to follow what our fellow brands like Gap or in the BCI and like H&M in all the recycling and ZHC and also HUGO Boss is also our fellow members in the ZHC and a lot of platforms. So we have our own brand, which is our Swiss people are quite proud of. It's called Nature line. So next year is our 25th years of anniversary. And we start this with very primitive technology. We cannot say it's high technology. We start in our own farm in Tanzania, so through Indian spinning and along the supply chain. So for every piece of garments, we can trace through from the farm. And for every customer who buy a garment of Nature line, they can have a very simple QR code, and they scan it. They not only know the name of the supplier or the name of the farmers, but they can see their faces. Because we want to, communicate, and what we said, transparency. So I think our Swiss people is quite proud of because, may I elaborate a little bit? Because
sure,
I didn't join my company for so many years, but I'm in the Swiss market for many years. So when I first joined, when I look at my product category, textile, I was very surprised because when we have a dual pack called price guarantee, that means very, very low price, it costs around like 425 Swiss francs. And then with our Nature line, it's also our own brand. Single piece, 24 Swiss francs. It's only a few meters inside the same shop, but it's selling. So I truly believe that this is the DNA. Sustainability is already incorporated into the daily life and the mindset of our Swiss people.
Excellent. Well done.
Thank you.
So before we get into it, just some housekeeping. I would invite you all to scan in the code. We will take questions pretty much throughout the whole presentation, so feel free. Obviously, if you haven't realized, it's four key leading brands that we, I think, interact with almost on a weekly basis. I think I own a garment from each of you. I might even shop in your supermarket.
Thank you.
So I'll ask, first, can we just maybe clearly identify from the brand perspective what is sustainability? Because, I mean, we talked a lot about it. We've talked a lot about it today. There's a lot of different definitions. So if we could try and, we'll start with you, Chris. If it's a repeat, then let's move on. But let's try and get this settled before we move in, yeah. Chris?
I think there's a couple of ways to answer that. At the highest level, I think a lot of people in the industry, the general term means moving from negative impacts on the communities, on the environment, on the world, to positive impacts, or at least neutral impacts. Specifically for us, in terms of what we focus on, we have an intense focus on sustainable raw materials, on water reduction, chemical reduction, and really focused on those areas in terms of the environmental impacts. On social impacts, it's how do we move from being an industry which is an important part of developing economies to actually playing a more active and proactive role in terms of helping those economies and those communities develop more rapidly and more effectively. So it depends on whether you're looking at the environmental side or
I would say that sustainability is all about making sure that we have business today, but also business in 10 years, in 30 years, in 50 years. We really need to respect the planetary boundaries, and as it is today, we do not. So that means to be able to have a prospect business also as the population is growing, we really need to decouple this use of, for example, virgin materials while we still grow as a company. So it's very much about the business today and the business in the future.
Great. Janice?
I would say for HUGO Boss, we are very low profile on sustainability, frankly. We don't even really do marketing on sustainable capsules. Sometimes I think it's too low key, but I would say in HUGO Boss is in the business philosophy. It's actually in the company, we believe what we are doing should be good for the society. So this is something already given. If you do not believe, then it's very hard for you to work in this company. So to me, is which I like because people around you, you don't have to spend a lot of time to convince and to explain why company, why the CEO, why everyone is pushing something, because it's part of the belief in the company, which I think is quite good actually. And also the suppliers, the vendors that work with us, of course they don't come with the same mindset at day one, but we try to look for the vendors that have the same mindset, with the same attitude. Even they don't have the ability today, it's fine, we can work together, we help, and then we help you to go there. So I would say it's more, to me, is from mindset to behavior that we believe in what sustainability means in the business. Yeah.
So much more of a behavior.
I really agree with what Janice and also my fellow speakers, because for us, the sustainability is not only the product or the technology, but it's also the communication, transparency, and education attitude along the supply chain for all the parties. From the suppliers, as you said, some suppliers are really, say no or really insist of that. But then we try to pull them, not only push, but pull them together, understand the market. When we invite them to go to Switzerland to see our product, why we have to have this sustainable product, because this is a daily life of people. Where you produce is consumed by the customers, and we also want you to have a sustainable production line and also management and the production factory, because we also want the workers there to have a sustainable life, a reasonable fair pay, and working in a safe environment. And also our colleagues or our staff in the office, we always encourage them together to have the joint workshop with the suppliers together. So not only not management on paper, but really in action, the understanding can communicate with supplier together in the same direction. And why your merchandising or why your sourcing team have to go to sustainability when I can do it easily with the lowest price or the best quality, but it is the DNA of the product for not only the Swiss people, but along everyone working along the supply chain.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we heard environment, social, financial, behavioral, education. So now it's technology. So can you give us some concrete examples of how have you used or how have your brands used technology to achieve some of those goals, and what were those goals exactly? Chris?
Sure. So when we look at technology as a company and with our suppliers and the ecosystem that we work with, and we look at something, let's take water maybe as a good example for us. So we have a public-facing goal to reduce our water consumption over the next few years by 10 billion liters a year, which is a moderately aggressive goal for us. And we've really focused on two areas of driving that goal. Both are technology related. The first area is really back to both driving the adoption of better practice in our value chain in terms of manufacturing technology. For example, the best-in-class dyeing equipment will use much less water per unit of textile than maybe an older piece of equipment. The right practice in terms of how you develop a denim wash will result in much less water consumption and chemical consumption than maybe other ways that you could develop that denim wash. And so a combination of both working with the value chain and the manufacturers to make sure that best-in-class technology and knowledge is being developed and adopted, and then simultaneously working with our designers and product teams to make sure that they have some both incentivization, but also visibility to what their choices result in terms of the environmental impacts. So we try to put those together. We essentially create the pool for the sustainable technology with our product teams and create the capability to supply with working with the manufacturers and understanding what they can do, incentivizing them to invest in the right technologies and the right knowledge.
And can you explain more specifically, is it technology, is it
It's a mix
technology, or is it technology that we can all use? Or?
Yeah, so I think the most impact for most of the industry that a lot of companies are starting to get pretty good at, and is essentially just leveraging what is existing best-in-class commercial technology. Right? And so there's an enormous amount of opportunity just to do that. There's such a variance, if you look at a textile manufacturing facility, of a facility that hasn't really worked and invested in sustainable, let's say, resource consumption of water, and a facility which has. There's enormous difference in capability. It can be 3, 4, 5, even 10 times the difference using commercial technology even. And so historically, maybe not everyone was from a manufacturing side. Not all companies were really investing maybe in that. Because even though there's some cost benefits from an operational cost basis, if the retail customers didn't really understand the difference between a really best-in-class factory and a not best-in-class factory, then other factors than their sustainable capability would drive the purchase decision. But the more there's visibility to the sustainable capability of different factories and different manufacturers, then the more that can affect the purchase decision. And so really the biggest opportunity that we've seen is just really driving understanding of best-in-class manufacturing, both in terms of the decisions we make and in terms of our suppliers realizing that we value it. So commercial technology. Now the other side, of course, is we're always looking for technologies which are on the maybe initial stage of the commercial life cycle or pre-commercial. In that area, we're trying to identify, okay, we can get from A to B in terms of water consumption from going from old dyeing processes and technologies to the same process, but the best-in-class equipment and practice. And maybe that gets you 30 or 40% water reduction, for example, just in something like knit dyeing. But then if you want to get to 90% water reduction or 100% water reduction, you'll probably have to adopt a different class or paradigm of technology. So as like just common technologies in the industry, for example, against that would be things like, everyone's heard of supercritical carbon dioxide. There's things with even different types of printing technologies can have a much lower water consumption than a dyeing technology if you can solve certain problems effectively from a quality standpoint and execution standpoint. And so we kind of look at what can we do with what's already readily available, and then where do we try to drive both our internal understanding and then also maybe adoption of differentiated technologies, which can take us from a 40% reduction of water to a 90% reduction of water.
So it's not just a technology you buy off the shelf,
right,
and you just put it in the office and hope that things happen. So it's technology with processes, systems, measures, right?
That's what we in the industry, I think, is working on, like to get better and better at that. So the easier part, of course, is solving the commercially available problem, because that is just driving more visibility. Things like HUGO index has been super important to us, for example, because that becomes a means to incentivize quantitative improvement against the goal. But then when you're looking at newer technologies, it's a combination of what's the best technology, but also how do you allow it to scale and thrive and reach its potential. Right, because sometimes you can have a great technology that can't really disrupt an incumbent supply chain that has a lot of billions of dollars invested in it already. So we work on both of those problem domains.
Excellent. Malin, speaking of technology, I guess it's finding technology and finding innovation. H&M, you're behind the Global Change Awards. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and sort of any new technology that you've come across that you've been able to implement or share or go into practice?
Yes, sure. So we look at technology through the full value chain. So if we talk today about this very linear system that we know that we really want to go into a circular value chain, we have the design stage, materials, production, moving on to actual user phase, and then recycling that in and making that sort of final garment into a new material. And that's where we have found a big gap as it is today. It's a big hurdle when it comes to recycling in textile. And for many of you in this room, you already know this, that often it's much blended between natural and synthetic materials, for example, and these are really hard to separate. So in a few years back, the H&M Foundation, which is a non-profit, set up a new challenge called the Global Change Awards. And the thought here is to really bring small startup innovations early on and accelerate them quickly in the textile industry. So it's not specific to H&M only. It's something, since it's an industry problem, we also look for industry solutions in this. So there is plenty of examples through that. This program, partly the winners get to share a grant of €1 million, but also it's very much part of a program where they get the network in the textile industry, which can be quite a conservative industry in some ways, and see how we can tie them with the right people, but also really support them on their sort of business journey of what they can learn from that. So that's open for applications until October 16th, if anyone has an amazing idea that they would like to bring forward. But one example of a winner is actually from here in Hong Kong, called Unspun, and they are based at the mills here in Hong Kong. And they really work with looking at 3D weaving, so you get the custom-made perfect jeans that you can use, and then you can they can also unspun it, is the thought, and then recycle it in a good way.
So it's not even technology that H&M will utilize themselves, as opposed to support and to let grow.
Exactly. So it's not like we buy these companies. We support them, and then depending on how they develop, we're of course very interested in that technology, right. But they don't become part of the H&M group or anything.
Excellent. Janice, can you elaborate further? Maybe give us some examples or specific technological adaptations that HUGO Boss have done or implemented in the company?
Like I said, we focus on the process. So when we look internally what we could do and the process be more sustainable with technology help, and we define actually in our process, like a normal fashion brand, we have from concept sample, proto sample, counter sample, salesman sample, marketing sample. So you know,
a lot of samples.
Yeah.
Huge bunch of samples back and forth. So you know the whole supply chain is talking about a lot of redo and redo. On one hand, it's cost and time. But on the other hand, if you look at all the carbon footprint, all the things, there's a very not sustainable way of doing our business. That's what we have been doing for many years. So I think this is what we define the internal process, that we should be more sustainable. So in our company, we kicked off the digital development project a few years back. And of course, we start from simple product like jersey t-shirt, polo t-shirt, that's easier. And now we come to the stage, like you can imagine for a down jacket, it's quite not easy, because you need to show whether it is a lightweight down jacket or medium weight or heavyweight or bulky, and the two-in-one. So all this in between is quite difficult to illustrate. Just on a 3D, you don't have the samples anymore. So we are on the way on that, and you could see our objective is, of course, we want to reduce our in between all those samples that we have, and we could have a more sustainable development process. Yeah.
Malin?
Yes, I would like to tag on to that, because we have a very interesting product that's in test phase, so this is not something that we have implemented, but basically also with the samples. So basically it's a VR experience where you have the designer, and then you have someone who is more like within merchandising or like a production specialist, and then the supplier. And then you sit in the same VR room, and you look at the 3D samples together, and you can give direct feedback. So the thought is like, go from idea to finished goods in 4 hours. To sort of just like, even if we're so far spread out around the world, how can we really minimize the samples going back and forth?
Awesome. Brenda?
Yes, I think I share the same experience with you because of all the sampling costs, when we are in Switzerland and all the sourcing are in the Asia, the courier costs and the material costs and the efforts, and actually sometimes in 1,000 of samples, maybe only 30 pieces are, okay, got the orders. So our buying team now is also try to apply and searching the most sustainable technology in the digital to realize how the fabric flows and how the shape or the size fitting. We try to cut down the proto, or even we have the idea that in maybe 2022, we can cut off all the proto samples. So once the proto samples are realized in the 3D, and then we can immediately transform to the supplier. So we have to study also the software in the supply side, so they can transform into a 3D pattern. So this is also our idea and also the direction. And also with product-wise, we are not a big player. We don't have the investment in metallurgy. So apart from what we said, our bio cotton, we also try to use as much as BCI or also the recycling material. And meanwhile, we try to do some recycling cashmere. Because cashmere is also one of our important products that the Swiss people really like much. We are trying to do so, but the cost-wise sometimes it's also a challenge. So we are looking for the big player like H&M or Gap. If they can support in this direction, then we can try to minimize the genuine raw material. Yeah.
So I hear from most of you that obviously you're looking at sustainability within the processes of your product and the development. How do we ensure that, or in future, it's just kind of going to be part of your company, that we don't need to talk about sustainability anymore, that maybe there's going to be something else, but how do we make sure that it becomes integrated within our businesses and not just greenwashed? Chris?
Yeah, I think the key is you have to make sure that sustainability becomes a genuinely important part of the decision process of what you develop.
So you would say core to the brand.
It has to be core to the fundamental decision of what you make in terms of how you develop something, how you buy something.
And not just a marketing.
And not just the cost and not just the perception of the customer attractiveness, right? And of course, even better is if there's increasing customer appreciated realization of the impact of sustainability. That's great. But no matter what, if inside the company, inside the retailer, if there's not a fundamental valuation of sustainability, which is very meaningful and drives people's decision process in fundamental ways, then it will always be secondary to everything else, right? So especially if you're a very large company like an H&M or Gap, you have to, of course, be very good at cost discipline, for example. And all of our suppliers, many in the room, they know that cost becomes often the dominant factor in the discussion. So if you can't somehow call sustainability to be another part, like maybe equal partner in the decision against what you buy, then it's very difficult to really drive really big scale impacts. There'll be some areas, like for example, in BCI, we were talking earlier, we've been able to shift the majority of our cotton production to BCI or similar sustainable materials, right? And so that's something we were able to do because there wasn't really an impact that faced, let's say, from an economic value or customer-facing impact. But sometimes you have to figure out, do I value sustainability enough to change how I behave and what I'm going to buy that might not be invisible? And so again, I think we've seen a lot of value and traction by allowing designers to understand the implication, let's say, of their denim wash decisions against sustainable impacts. And as soon as you create that visibility and as soon as you have an actual accountable target for water reduction, then we see things move. But before we had the combination of the target and the visibility and the incentivization, then it really didn't matter because you would get maybe small wins, but you couldn't really move the at-scale supply chain or the at-scale purchase decision. So I think it has to be a combination of targets that are real and meaningful and ambitious. You have to have visibility and you have to have decision processes which people are really incentivized to make a balanced decision instead of just a cost-based decision.
And I would imagine most consumers don't understand the complexity. I mean, you guys on the front, you are the brand. I don't think many of you own your own factories, so you are dealing with, other companies that are sourcing on your behalf. And I don't think any of you can say 100% that you're fully sustainable. Right. And I think we also have to realize that each one of us have our own efforts and we're trying. It's hard, there are challenges. I think sometimes it's easier for younger brands to start in this day and age, right? And come up with new, like Unspun. But as brands, Malin, I'll put this one to you. What are then some of the challenges that you face in moving into that sustainable model or moving to that green light, let's say?
One of the challenges is, like you talk about, really integrate sustainability into everything we do, so it really becomes part of decision making everywhere. And so we, for H&M specifically, our brand promise used to be fashion and quality at the best price. And in 2013, we added in a sustainable way. Because to really clarify for everyone working within the company that you can always lean on this and that this is integrated in the business model. This is what we promise to our customers. Is it always easy? No. I mean, we are 120,000 people, so in different markets and with different backgrounds and so on. But if you have it as part of your values, as part of your brand policy, and really have the buy-in from the top management, then it's definitely doable. But it is challenging, yeah.
Can you always guarantee that everyone in the supply chain is committed? So the zippers and the buttons, and is there any way to fully trace that? And can technology be used to help in that process?
Yeah, that's definitely a good challenge to raise. So like you mentioned, we don't have any of our own factories. We have supplier companies that we work together with, and they have the next step of like the fabric, the buttons, and then the next step to spinning and so on. So it's a huge, complex world that we are operating in. That's why it's so important to really have for your company a vision where you want to go and clear goals. And then you have to prioritize and sort of move together. And collaboration. That's why it's so important to be in these type of venues as we are today, to really speak together, because it is really industry problem, so we need industry solutions as well.
And I would imagine most of those challenges are exactly the same challenges that all of you are facing. Of which then, Janice, maybe what are then some of the challenges that you think that HUGO bosses have come across?
I think it's like you said, it's quite common in the industry what we are facing. And frankly, I would say we are all waiting for the economy of scale. I think the technology is right there, but not in a very commercial, in an affordable way for everybody. So if one day, imagine we don't have that barrier on cost, then it will be very easy in the decision making. Now why it's so difficult, because it's not a very available answer at a very low cost. You need to make the business decision while we understand we support the sustainability. So I think the economy of scale is everybody's here is waiting, and behind it is like, I think it's the topic, the technology. We're waiting for the technology breakthrough. Imagine like the old days, computer is something not for everybody. But once the technology is there, it's so cheap that everyone can afford for the computer. So I think it's part of it. We are waiting for that moment so that it's not such a difficult topic that everybody will need to discuss. So this, at the end, is an industry initiative. I think will benefit all the brands. Yeah?
Right.
I'd imagine one example, for example, like I said, we have the digital development. When we asked the first garment vendor to invest on the computer software, they're like, wow, it's like, how much, and then a lot of concern. But after like 6-9 months, and then they come back and say, oh, interesting, now they got some other brands ask for that. So they see, oh, there is an economy of scale. So if they invest on that, it's not only for me, it's also for some other clients. So they start the interest to invest more. So I do see this is like a very demanding supply. When more brands work towards this direction, when the economy of scale is there, then, yeah, I think the ball will roll out faster.
Right. Chris, I'll hand it over to you, but I will ask whatever you're going to mention, the role of then government. Do we have to make it policy, for example, that everyone needs to sign up to a technology to make sure that we are implementing it to bring the cost down and make it standard? Or is it then each one to their own to figure it out?
So I think the government sometimes does play an important role. You can look at the evolution of air quality, for example, in the US or Europe, or some of the European regulations and the impact that has on global companies to make decisions differently and weigh differently. But my perspective is that there's probably a more important role even for the retail industry to play, realizing that if sustainable issues aren't solved at some point in time, they become an existential threat to the companies, to the business. The fundamental business model of high volume fashion products, for example, is under existential threat, eventually through resource pressure, through sustainability related pressures. So the question I think for the industry to ask is, will solutions mature and become cost sustainable more rapidly if you're actively involved or not? And I think, of course, the answer that I think increasingly most of the retailers get to is yes, solutions will be readily available, which are economically viable and result in sustainable economies of scale, which are circular or low resource consumption. The solutions will be found more quickly if the industry and the retail industry figures out how to incentivize those developments more quickly, maybe much more quickly than if we take a passive wait-and-see role. The question is, because some of these problems are so big, circularity is a great example. It's incredibly complex. You can see, like if you are immersed in circularity, you can see from a technology standpoint, if I put this together with this and I like create this type of multi-value chain type economy and I do this and that, you can definitely see that the problem is solvable. Like there are amazing potential solutions to circular economies. But then you start thinking about how do I get there? It's very complex, right? Because you need multiple technologies and maybe non-existent or nascent business models to come together at the same time. And that's something in an industry as conservative as ours is very difficult. It's very unlikely that that happens, right? Or it happens anytime soon. So I think the question, H&M has been super involved in this, for example, is what can the retailers do, either individually or in collaboration, to cause those multi-tier solutions to converge together more quickly. And I think that, yes, government plays an important part, and I think eventually government pressure about you cannot, actually, for example, generate wastewater quality, which is, that's very important. But I think the actual generation solutions will become retailers playing a more collaborative and proactive role to solve the economies at scale, right? And that could be direct intervention, it can be creating driving force, it can be through creating the ecosystems and fostering those ecosystems so that there's more people solving hard problems, but we have to play a role.
You say technology, also retail, and I think it's super fascinating because we do have a number of manufacturers in the room that are producing their own brands, that are using technology, e-platforms to sell directly to consumer, almost cannibalizing, kicking you guys out of the picture. So I guess we also got to watch who uses it first and how far they get with it. At some point, maybe consumers are just going to start buying from your manufacturers and leave you out of the picture, right?
Well, I think what happens if the consumer, the more we can educate consumers, or consumers awaken themselves to value sustainability, and the more in a credible way we can attribute products with those sustainable qualities, then that will become economic incentive. And that will drive everyone, whether it's the manufacturers, whether it's the retailers, to move in the right direction. I think one of the challenges we've had is, like, even though there's pockets of consumers which clearly have a strong valuation that they'll reflect with their purchase decision on sustainable outcomes, it tends to be not necessarily broad spread through the entire consumer base. It'll be more on a niche basis. Patagonia, for example, is a great story about how a sustainable-oriented company was able to create synergy with a group of consumers who also value that, right? And they get some benefit from that in that regard. So the more customers value sustainability in ways that affect their purchase decision, of course, that'll drive the global economy to align against that preference. The challenge is that takes time, right? And also solving the hard problems takes time. So you have a chicken and the egg. And so I think the trick for the industry is how do we become more proactive to make sure that there is progress against creating those sustainable economies at scale. At the same time, figure out how to drive more customer appreciated value for those sustainable efforts, right? And I think independent verification and credibility against sustainable message become an important part of that.
Excellent. Brenda, we were talking about challenges. What are some of the challenges that Eurogroup or Coop face in terms of technology and the implementation of technology?
Yeah, for us, Coop is so big as a Switzerland company, but the quantity for the garments, for the apparel, is always very small. So, even the Swiss people are always, with a strong sustainable initiative, but business is still cost-driven. So I think, as what my fellow speaker said, once the technology runs, so try and error, pulling the cost down, and with a bulk quantity, in the long term, pull down the costs, then will help, because that's why we always like to work with suppliers who is already the suppliers of H&M, because they already have this DNA inside the supply chain in the production. And we don't need to really push them, and they already have a strong understanding. So it helps. But right now, quantity for me is still a very tough challenge.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. We actually have some questions. To all the panelists, what role does training play in upskilling your large teams, companies towards more sustainable practices? Is good training readily available, or do you need to develop it internally? Who wants to take that one?
I can take it.
Maybe from the small players first.
Okay, we'll go with small.
Yeah, I think training is very important,
Right.
not only with our suppliers, not only within our sourcing team in Asia, but also training inside our headquarters and Swiss people with the buyers. Because for them, they always look for the direction, the storyboard, and then they will sometimes forget in the sustainable direction. And we always have to pull them back together, not only looking at the cost or not looking at the price, but you have to pay your part of sustainable, because we believe that in the long run, the cost will go down. But this is really a challenge. But I think education, training is important, and we took it like a regular base. Every year we will remind everybody along the supply chain to go to workshop and we talk together about how's the progress now, how other brands are doing, and what is our status, and what we should go on, because we should achieve a certain target every year, but we are not so ambitious. So, Swiss people are very pragmatic, so we do it step by step.
I think as well, a lot of people fail to realize that most of your CEOs grew up in a time and in a generation where the word sustainability wasn't even mentioned when they went to high school or university. So I find a big part of it about re-educating and educating those within the industry. I mean, from an academic perspective, it's about educating the new batch going into industry and also creating new systems and ideas of what sustainability is. So it's really a 360 approach to educating. Malin, you wanted to also respond to that?
Someone said something earlier in one of the panels, but I agree with also that there's multiple things when it comes to training. Partly, I mean, a lot of people are attracted to working for H&M because of the sustainability work, so we already have that a bit for free, so to say. But in the onboarding process, being very clear and really empower them to take sustainable decisions, I think is very important. Like you say, keep on educating, and then for specific roles, then you need to really dive down to what does it mean for a sourcing team, or what does it mean for a designer. So I think then you need to tailor-made it and have it integrated in their regular training sessions. But then I think there's also great opportunity when it comes to sustainability, because that's really a reason for people to feel proud of the work that they do and the company that they work for. So that's also a great way to get people engaged when talking about it.
Excellent. Yeah, Chris?
Just to add on to that, I think I agree. You have to look at training or education. There's a couple different vectors that you're pursuing based on. So awareness, and I would agree completely, like awareness of sustainable impact and the negative impacts of our industry, especially among the younger generation, is already very good. And you can see that awareness propagating pretty quickly through certainly our internal community in the industry, but also our consumer base. And the easiest thing probably to do from a corporate training standpoint probably is the awareness. And so I feel like awareness, that's a problem which like we always need to continue to work on, but it has a lot of natural momentum. There's another type of education or training, which is back to how do I affect the actual decision process and the way of working to result in more consistent outcomes and operationalize progress against goals. And so that gets back to, for example, making sure you have the skill set and capability and training so you can evaluate quantitatively different denim wash formulations and understand which one is better. Right, so you need to and then how do I use that information as a designer to make better decisions? So that's another type of education or training. But then the third part, and I feel like this is both the hardest and where there's tremendous amount of need, is the skill set of how to actually solve these problems in the first place. And it's always a challenge, I think, as you shift in the industry from solving certain types of problems to solving different types of problems, the skill set and the number of people and the bandwidth, the people who know how to actually think about, okay, here's this problem. I need to reduce my footprint with respect to these negative environmental impacts. What does that really mean? How do I attack that? And of course, there's technology elements. Of course, there's process and systems elements. There's IT technology elements. there's education elements, but really the key is how all that works together. And so we often see that, like, and I would say this is across the industry, there's not a lot of people out there who've built the skill set to understand how to put the pieces together, understand what talent specifically to bring in, and then drive the progress in an effective way. And often when we're interfacing with education centers and universities, it's like the more you can prepare younger talent to learn how to do those sorts of things, right, then the more that we can start to drive progress. And it's not easy. It's not an easy skill set. You can't just do a corporate training course and someone understands how to solve these more complex network type problems. It's something you have to put effort into over time, and we need help also from the education.
So it's less, I mean, it's a combination, I guess, of both skill set and mindset. I mean, when I was a professor, we often talked about the importance of creating students who had the ability to be agile, to be able to solve problems. So it's not about just reading a textbook, but actually trying to solve the problem on their feet, right?
Exactly. It's really learning agility. I mean, one of the most valuable skills that if you get it early in your career is the capability, whatever the problem domain is, to start to work against it in an effective way, to be able to decompose it, understand some of the driving forces, and then think about, okay, how do I start trying to attack this, and how do I try something and learn, and then how do I incorporate those learnings into the next iteration. And so I think the learning agility of our industry in this area is one of the big opportunities for us to move faster. How do we get more of our employees to have the capability to work collaboratively to solve these complex problems?
Right, because I can attest that there are so many programs out there, actual programs to be used. I can't teach each student every single program in 4 years, right? So you got to take them to the mindset that they can do it.
They themselves can learn the program.
Exactly.
And it's not really a barrier to switch from software A to software B because they understand how to learn software.
Right. Janice, I wanted to ask you about, do your customers actually appreciate, and do they even know the technological implementations that the brand has done towards sustainability?
I don't really think in high percentage because, like I said, we are very low key on marketing, on what we have done.
Right.
So I don't think customer know that, when they come to buy HUGO Boss, this is what really a sustainable capsule. Recently, we have a little bit marketing on the footwear because we have something really innovative. So we have a little bit marketing on the pineapple leaf, the pineapple fiber, and making the sneaker. So that's the only one I really saw the advertisement in the market. But other than that, so far, what we did in the sustainable capsule, I don't see a lot of marketing from our brand perspective. Like I said, we believe we should do the good way at the price that we can afford, and then we go for it. So I think this is the HUGO Boss way. But on the other hand, I do believe customer, they like the quality in HUGO Boss. So this is also in our blood. We have to deliver the same quality while we have the sustainability mindset at the back of the supply chain. So to me, I don't really think customer may really realize which one is so-called by recycled polyester, which one is, I don't think so.
It's a tricky fine line, really. It's almost like a double-sided knife because I could imagine, with both Gap and H&M, if you start talking about all your sustainable practices, it's going to backfire. That then people are going to scrutinize everything that you do. So it's like, how much do you talk about it versus how much do you just do it and just it becomes a practice, right?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we don't work with sustainability for a marketing reason, and that's why it is very, these terminologies like greenwashing and such can very quickly come up. So we really want to feel like we're doing the right thing when we're communicating, and that can make us be a bit quiet sometimes, and that's a very tough line to walk.
We actually have a question for you. It's do you think any difficulties for a fast fashion brand H&M to go for sustainability supply chain? So I guess looking more at what I guess the difficulties for a brand like H&M to ensure full transparency
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge with the size, and like we talked about this huge value chain, definitely we are not want to be out and police our like supplier every day. We want to really just share knowledge and make sure that they're on the right track, meet our minimum requirements, but it's also separate business from us. So it's definitely a challenge with the size, but also a great opportunity.
Right. Chris, maybe you can add to it in terms of big brand. How much of it adds value to the brand in terms of communicating sustainability or just, keeping it as part of the practice in the background?
Yeah, so I think similar kind of trajectory that we started a few years later on environmental sustainability, and that you don't want to start talking about things that you can't really back up, especially in an area like sustainability. So we actually spent quite a few years doing pretty heavy work in the background with our value chain to start driving sustainable best practice and technology, getting rid of really bad factories and making sure they couldn't exist in our infrastructure, and incentivizing our supply chain partners through who we worked with and who we worked with strategically based on the work that they were doing themselves against sustainability and how much they themselves believed on sustainability. But we didn't talk much about that because we didn't feel we didn't really maybe know how, and secondly, we weren't sure we were to a threshold of credibility to be able to talk about that and not get accused of greenwashing. So we're slowly but surely starting to talk about some of the things that we're doing. But now I think it's very positive because almost our public disclosure becomes a part of also our internal change management. If you talk out to the street that you're going to reduce your water consumption by 10 billion liters, you're committed to that. And it helps actually as a big company to drive incentive in a way that's both more effective, but also people can have some pride about, and hopefully you start to affect customer perception. And then I think we still have a long way to go with respect to understanding how really to engage the customer on all the things that we're doing and create more awareness of that over time.
But it can also be a challenge to the rest of the industry. If you come out, I mean, I remember when the first recycled, the plastic shirts came out, was the first, and then everyone else started it, right? So it also sets a benchmark opportunity for brands, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I'm sometimes not sure. I think it varies greatly depending on the customer segment and what you're doing. But there's a lot of potential opportunity, I think, to be a leader visibly to the industry with respect to what you're doing. It's a skill set that we haven't really practiced ourselves. But it's one that I think is important because if you don't have someone who's pushing the envelope who has some credibility, then I think everyone kind of waits and sees, right? But as soon as you see someone jump onto, for example, a new technology, right, and they talk about that publicly, then you see everyone go after that.
Right.
And the kind of one way of thinking is that's a bad thing, right? Because if everyone goes after a technology, then maybe that hurts my competitive advantage. But I think one of the great things about sustainability is so many of the problems are way beyond one company anyway. Like you actually get to the point, like, you know what, here's a technology, it could be amazing. I actually can't get it to an economically sustainable place myself. So there becomes a different way of thinking where there's value to a lot of people looking at that technology and investing in that technology because you need it to scale much larger than your company for your company to participate in it. So I think for us, we've kind of started to switch into a mode where we become more comfortable to talk about technologies we're looking at because we realize actually, one, that creates positive perception, but in other cases, you actually need that technology to propagate as quickly as possible, and it will propagate more quickly if people see that big companies are looking at it seriously.
I find it super fascinating because at the same time, it's about what we're saying, working together and working with the manufacturer, working with their suppliers and affecting the whole ecosystem. So it's not just you, it's actually everybody together. Chances are you all use very similar manufacturers, right? So at that point, helping them get there helps you as well. Yes. Brenda, you mentioned earlier, you call it low tech. How much of your low tech is actually part of culture in terms of maybe it's just a Swiss way of doing things that make them more sustainable, and therefore the company is just naturally more sustainable?
Well, I think the Swiss people, the Swiss customers already have a pressure because they always ask and transparency. So in our production, in our sourcing, so we have to open our list, our open sources online for everybody, and they really say we need sustainable material sourcing and no more artificial materials. So we are very careful in putting on the quality mark, especially with polyester. So we are trying to also adopt the technology like recycled polyester, because then we can have the chance to educate them that we have the new technology that we transform this petroleum product into the life cycle to extend the life cycle. So I think this is also part of our strategy. Yeah.
And core to the brand, essentially.
Yeah, right.
I have another question for H&M and Gap, which is, do you think sustainability has added value to your brand in mainland China? Has it been a value add?
Yeah, that's a complex question. I would say it depends a little bit on the awareness level of the customer, and also what they see as sustainability, what's important. For example, for us, we work a lot with our garment collecting programs, where our customers can, in any H&M store, anytime that we're open, bring in all the textile that they don't want to use anymore, and we take care of that, and we give them a voucher for their next purchase as a thank you, because we really see this as something as a resource. Then that is actually sold to one of our partners that take care of it and sort it, and the money that we make is given to different charities around the world. I think for the garment collecting program, that's a great way to start a conversation with consumers about awareness of why are we doing this, and what is happening with what they give us, and so on. So I think being customer-centric, I mean, we as a brand exist for our customers, is key. And my feeling is, for mainland China, a lot is happening very rapidly within sustainability.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. It's difficult for me to affirmatively answer yes. I think the potential for mainland China, but also let's take Hong Kong also, is it's often easier to experiment with different ways to think and different ways to orient your business model and your value chain in China, as opposed to if you're manufacturing things in Asia and maybe working in the US market. So I think in terms of trying to figure out innovative ways to drive sustainability as a value add, I think China has enormous opportunity. That definitely applies to mainland China. I think it also applies, interestingly, to Hong Kong, because you have this kind of capsule economy with all of this talent capability, very high density from a retail penetration standpoint. So there's interesting things that you can do to experiment against how can I figure this out? How can I get more value add through, for example, sustainability or product innovation or business model innovation or whatever. So for us, I think it's probably an opportunity we haven't fully tapped into.
Okay. Janice, I have a question for you. And is it easier for luxury brands such as Hugo Boss to implement sustainability because they can charge the customer for the upcharge that comes with using sustainable fibers and high-tech manufacturing processes? Can you get away with it?
I think there's like a myth in the market that people may think it's easier for higher-end brand because we looks like we sell at higher price. We have better FOB. We have a bigger room for higher FOB. But if you ask the sourcing people, I can tell you no. I think it's the same if you ask everyone in the industry because, I rather would share, for example, like all our outerwear jacket, we have the water repellent, even though we don't say it. And we don't claim it because we think this is part of the function that a normal customer, they need. So we have that. But nowadays, we all know about that we want everything PFC free. So between the aesthetic, the fashion, the appearance that we want to achieve versus the technology, we pay high price for that. And even we pay the price, we don't have the technology to support to achieve exactly what we want. So if you ask me whether we have a better room for that. I don't think so. I think every brand faces the same. If you ask Gap, ask H&M, ask Coop, we talk about the water repellent, waterproof. I think everyone is the same. It's not about I can pay more, but it's just the technology is not there yet. Once the technology is there, everyone can pay for it, then I think all the brands can benefit. Yeah. So this is what I'm looking for, actually.
I really share with you, there's no room for the FOB price.
I think I'd agree with that. I think it's very difficult just to push apples price increases just for the sustainable feature. One thing, we have a portfolio of brands though, and we have everything from like pretty tight value retail price to like, we call it maybe affordable luxury, but let's say mid-tier pricing. And what we've seen is, and it's kind of a trade-off, is with really two principles. One is, and this is often advice I give like just in general, if you're just trying to push sustainability, but a product, everything else is the same, it's often very, very difficult because the pricing for that product will be judged against the legacy product, which probably is highly optimized on cost, by the way. And it becomes very difficult because you can't really pay for anything. But if you can innovate on multiple tiers and you're creating some product differentiation value and it's sustainable, and or maybe you can do it more quickly and more agilely in the market, if you combine multiple things together, then the pricing discussion of just the sustainability component is often drowned out and hidden by the other values that you're generating. And with brands that have a higher FOB basis to work with, there's more, let's say, differentiated product attributes you can often work with. And so as a consequence of that, what we've seen is often when we're piloting a new technology or a new chemistry or something of that sort, it's easier sometimes to do it in our higher price brands as opposed to our value brand because there's kind of more to work with. There's more of a appetite for differentiation of the product. And the sustainability part, really you can't see it in the signal, the noise of the pricing. The trade-off is that if you really want to have mass impact, you need to get it to mass market, right? If you want to really impact, for example, in terms of a differentiated, more sustainable fiber, you don't want it to be in 100,000 units. You want it to be in your billion units. And that's where you do eventually run into, like, how do I get the cost to work out? But I think sometimes early stage technologies or things that you're trying to understand the value and learn about the value, it's nice to have some higher price points that you can play in.
A question I actually from this morning, and now that we're talking about technology, blockchain. Are any of you using blockchain when it comes to supply chain, or is it in the pipeline to be using blockchain to trace your supply chain?
It's definitely a technology that we're looking at and that's interested in. But I think for all technology, you have to really start at like, what are we trying to solve? Right. And how is this technology matching that? I think that's what, because sometimes you can get lost in these buzzwords like AI or blockchain or something, and it gets all excited. But actually, what is it in the details? How does blockchain, for example, match that? It would be interesting to hear the other discussion also, what they come up with when it comes to blockchain.
Anyone else?
I think for Coop is not in the forefront yet, but we would really like to apply because I think this is a kind of technology that if we can sustain for our next generation. As we already said, as Chris also said, sustainability we cannot realize in cost, in figures yet, but it is a value added. Right,
because you gotta watch the risk that you do the investment. H&M is a great example where you openly publish all your manufacturers, the details, the addresses, the phone numbers. I would generally be curious how many customers actually pick up the phone and call that manufacturer in China to find out if they're really producing your product. I mean, it's nice to have and you satisfy the customer, but then, as you say, will they really use it? What was the value add, right? I have another question here, and it's in regards to excess stock. Do any of you have, or are you using technology that will help reduce excess stock in your brands? Yes,
I mean, we recently, last year or so, set up a specific AI and advanced data analyst hub in Stockholm as one of the departments for our headquarters. So one of the things that we really see connected to sustainability is that this type of, we don't call it artificial intelligence, we call it amplified intelligence, because we really want our employees to be able to use this technology to take even better decisions. And one thing is to make sure that we always have the right good in the right place, in the right store even, really understanding our customers, our customer segments, and then provide the products that they love.
I would echo that. I think probably for the industry, the single biggest relatively easy sustainability opportunity, which is also an economic opportunity, is how to have the right thing, right place, right time, right quantity. And there's a vast amount of kind of inefficiency in traditional fashion value chain that's a result really of being really unable to predict what should be in the right place at the right time. And so there's a vast amount of waste which is generated there. And so I think you see the whole industry really marshaling behind how do I get better at that? Because one, it's worth enormous amounts of money economically, but secondly, it's also super important in terms of sustainable income or impacts, because you just have a lot less stuff which is wasted. And it's a very big opportunity and problem for the industry.
Janice, Brenda, I'll throw the questions down there now. There's a question here about 3D digital sampling, that if we were just to implement 3D digital sampling, a lot of our problems should be solved. Are there any other technological developments in the pipeline that your brands are considering that you can share with us? New technology?
It's very primitive, lean assortment. I think we don't have big quantity, so we don't have the problem of big stock, but we still see that the lean assortment, placing the right order at the right place, and also synergy among the different teams, because like with cotton or with cashmere, we always encourage the buying teams to do the synergy sourcing. The kids can share the same colorways with the ladies or even with the men, so to minimize, buying the wrong quantity and the wrong colors. So I think this is the very primitive, for the Swiss people, we use this technology first.
Janice?
I think on that, German people is quite similar. Yeah. They are too close.
But we are in the same border. It's very close border. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, quite similar.
Gap, H&M, there is a lot of questions here as they see you as the fast fashion and excess stock. What are you using, or how are you using technology to ensure that you're not left with excess stock and forecasting?
One example that I already shared was connected to the AI, but in general, like you say, it's so much also financial. It's not only a sustainable question. We don't really have a problem with overstock today. What happens with the clothes that don't sell exactly when we want to sell it is that they go on sale. So that's usually, and that's not good for business either, because we have less profit. So definitely great incentives to work even more with that. But the way we drive technology otherwise, I mean, of course, we have like the way we have what type of software we use, the buying setup, how we work with it in this global community. Of course, that's a lot of technology that we use in different ways.
Chris?
Yeah, I would just echo. I think if you look at the opportunity for the industry in general, it's a combination of data science, and it's a combination of the agility of the supply side of the value chain. And so it's way beyond just like what software package or like what, it's a combination of a lot of different types of knowledge that need to be then operationalized at scale to tap into the potential of what it means to do retail in the modern economy. Most of the retail industry is still operating in a similar way about how we do our forecasting, our prediction, our demand, our planning, that we did really 15, 20 years ago, maybe slightly incrementally enhanced by some tools and systems and so forth. But we haven't at scale across the industry tapped into the power of the data science and the information which is available now, nor have we really worked with our supply chains to optimize their characteristics so that it really can be optimized against this demand, supply-demand problem. So it's a huge opportunity for the industry at large. I see the whole industry is mobilized against it. So
Right.
it is, people are working on it because that's the obvious thing to work on.
But I mean, that's also the opportunity there for example, AI to come in to
Exactly,
help advise
exactly.
on the data science of
The data science is so
forecasting
critical. It's utterly essential, because that's an element which didn't exist before, that plus the data itself.
Right.
Right. So then, once you have that, it starts to affect the fundamental economics of what it means to be a best-in-class value chain.
Right.
So the value chain as well is more agile,
Right.
and you have this data science and this information, and you have a decision process which can leverage all those components. Then the opportunity is enormous. But you have to put a lot of different things together, or you can't realize the value.
So do you think in future we can kind of bundle all that together and just kind of put that in AI and say we need a source from this place and it has to hit that and has to sell that and just leave it to AI to then spit out a report at the end of the month and say produce more of this?
Well, I mean, I think you'll see a lot of people in the industry, their hypothesis is that even roles traditionally such as merchandising are way more AI influenced in the future because and look at someone like Amazon is an extreme version of that. I mean, they don't really have merchandising in the same way that a traditional retailer has. Their merchandising is the algorithm itself. It is taking all this information source, taking in individualized models against people, and using that to understand what curated assortment to present to a specific individual, a specific time. And so I think that the AI, the data science, has so many implications which fundamentally change what the industry looks like 10 years from now. Right. And some people are already there, a large part of the way. The industry at large still has a lot of work to do to realize the potential. Is
there anyone you can mention that you think is doing it well, or?
Well, again, the tech companies are intrinsically good at this, right? So I think you look at Amazon or Alibaba, that is like an extreme application of those principles.
Right, super interesting. A question for everyone. Obviously, we've been talking a lot about sustainability in processes, materiality. In regards to labor, so sustainability is not only about business and environment, but also about people. Talking about labor work issues, underpaid, underage, etc., concerning fast fashion brands. How and what effort has been done to improve the corporate social responsibility for these people, and can technology be used to help this?
There has been a lot done. I mean, this is definitely, like I talked about for H&M, for example, we really started working a lot on sustainability from mid-90s. And the starting point was actually that we learned in Asia that there was risk of child labor. And we had no clue, because we were working not in the same way we do today, directly with suppliers. We were working with a lot of middlemen and so on. So from that, we moved a lot of our offices much closer to suppliers and worked very much on different type of industry setups to solve this problem. We can talk for hours about social sustainability. It's definitely core, but it's also not specific. It's not like a mass production or fast fashion problem. It's an industry problem, and different to different countries what challenges are faced. So I want to underline that.
Do you think technology like blockchain can be used in that? So, I can check out, this sweater was made by this person and got $1 a day? Or?
I mean, definitely in terms of transparency, where you, like you say, you could even, today we disclose if you go into H&M.com, you'll see which producer which supplier that made that garment. You don't see the person today, like this example, which sounds really interesting, or there's some information we don't have to share today. So definitely there are a lot more there on the transparency side that the customer is asking for. And I think it's very much a trust-based question, like you said before, like, okay, they like that we can go in and see the supplier, but they don't really do anything with that. They more feel like, okay, they have it under control, so to say.
And that's where I guess, you just should do the right thing. I mean, you would work with companies that you would trust, would pay their laborers the fair wage, and not need to put this kind of scare tactic on them that if they don't, you've got blockchain to hold them accountable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have the right intentions, but somewhere along the line, that's where the trust is broken. Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, I think in addition, there's definitely the element of technology is still, I think, underutilized in terms of allowing big companies to manage their value chains. That's definitely one area of opportunity. I think there's another dimension, which is how does technology actually shift some degree of empowerment to the actual communities themselves. And so obviously you see the propagation of mobile technology starts to have some really fascinating impacts into actual communities and into low labor markets, because people have access to information. And when they have access to information, they start to have different ways that they themselves can start to control their own destiny, whether that's from their capability to make better decisions and be better informed, to organize in different ways, or to create their own different types of economies locally and so forth. You also see, certainly there's in the startup area, you see different types of fintech type models where part of the value that people are trying to unlock is how to actually shift more economic value to the communities and to the manufacturers or the agricultural providers through transparent visibility to their sustainable practices, right? And so, how do I make it more likely that a farmer will get incentivized for growing a crop in the right way, right? Or how do I make it more likely that a community will be appropriately understood with respect to where it is with respect to water scarcity. Right. So I think there's a lot of interesting things happening where technology starts to also drive some empowerment to the actual communities and the people themselves over time.
I have more of a philosophical, maybe not philosophical, but a question for the industry to think about. And that's connected to that this industry is, if you look at the supply chain, quite manual labor, and it's quite more like a art than anything you create with your hands. If we push technology, robotics, and all of this very tough into the producing companies, what will happen then with all these people that has this job today? What will they be able to do instead? So then it becomes this social sustainability question versus technology.
Right. You're also at risk, I guess it's the idea of scale economy. I think it's very easy for us to say, well, if the person who made this jacket got $1 a day and I want to pay them more, how do you ensure that money goes all the way down? Yes. It's not as easy. There's a lot of complexity because you're dealing with a lot of people in the whole process of things, right? I'll ask you all, in terms of future and your brands, how will your brands use technology for the future, and how can you see technology being used within your brands? I'll start with Brenda.
Well, as what we already have our own branded toy line starting from the farm, so I think the blockchain can really integrate, can help to integrate more transparency. We don't have any problem in seeing the continuation and accessibility of this brand. But for all the conventional suppliers who are still doing the conventional materials, not really organic or not really recycled, we do have a very stringent screening process, sharing all the information with our Coop headquarters. And I do see that with this blockchain then help to speed up the process for us to screening these conventional suppliers. And also, as I said, I'm always happy to share all the suppliers and the vendors, the producers from like H&M and Gap, who is already under all the screening and under all the audits. So I think this is like a collaboration, transparency in the brand that we help to push together to the market and also educate our vendors. Yeah.
Janice?
For me, I think technology can help the traceability and the transparency. There's no question. But in our industry, I would say people and the mindset is more difficult to change, and it's more difficult to manage than the robot. So I think this is like a take and off, whether you focus to have the technology to help you to solve the sustainability issue, or is that the only, it's like a helper, I would say it's like a bonus for the solution, but at the end of the fundamental of the topic, I don't think technology itself can help, because we all sitting here, every one of us is contributing to what's happening in the planet today. It's not the technology, but it's us, actually. So I would say it's people and mindset is more critical, actually. Yeah.
I think there's multiple areas where you can use technology going forward. We already talked a lot about recycling. I think we have Renewcell here in the room as well. That's a company that we have invested in that also recycles partly mixed blends. But then it's also very much for us, we have set very ambitious goals when it comes to climate. So 2030, we want to be climate neutral, and 2040, climate positive. So there, we don't really know exactly how to get there yet. So that's going to need a lot of technical advancement and scale up to reach that and support that. And things are happening, like the return of investment on solar panels, for example, at supplier site was maybe 10 years before, and now it's maybe 4 or 5 years. So things are moving along, but definitely on that side. Yes, they also connected to the customer, really support them on, especially now in the mobile age, how can we share information with them, how can we support them and educate them? I think technology will be a big part.
Mm-hmm. Chris?
Yes, I think first I'd echo what Janice was saying, is that the technology is super important, but it's not necessarily the hardest challenge that the industry has to face. It's really, how do we make these complex changes, which are kind of intrinsically long-term problems in an industry that's very complex, very fragmented, and intrinsically short-term in how we think about things. And you can see progress, right? But there's a shift which needs to occur over time with respect to the industry's capability to think differently, to solve intrinsically long-term problems more effectively, and to kind of get over some of our historical attributes that we've developed. That aside, I think the technology is super important both to allow retailers and customers to create value for things like sustainability through visibility, through traceability, through awareness and understanding, through innovative different market and business models. You have to unlock value that's associated directly with, in this case, sustainability. And then, of course, there's the applying the different component manufacturing technologies or agriculture or business model innovations against how you satisfy that and essentially realize that latent economic potential. So create more value through how you can create demand valuation for things like sustainability, and then figure out how we bring these multiple technologies together to create circular economies, for example. And so, it's very complex. There's a lot of really exciting things to work on over the next several decades as we figure this out.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
No. Super interesting industry. People should be excited. If you're young and you're in this industry, you should be really excited. It's a fascinating time to be in the industry.
And there's so many opportunities.
Absolutely.
If you know how to use the tools correctly. Excellent. So just to recap, we heard a lot about transparency, the need for collaborations with partnerships, the importance of role of education within understanding what technology is all about, that it's a powerful tool to be used wisely. Sustainability has to be intrinsically core to the brand with a long-term vision, and essentially it's about people and mindset, right? Excellent. I'm glad we solved that. So let's go out and make the change that's needed. Panelists, thank you very much for today and for your very insightful knowledge. Audience, thank you for bearing with us. And we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.